So, what you want to do when you're doing these readings, first of all, let me know if you can't download these for whatever reason, if you don't get access to them. Tell me that well before the due date of their reading. So this was supposed to have been read for today. So if there would have been a quiz today, there's not. But there could have been, but there isn't. Could be a quiz any day, right? Any class period. I'm not going to give you a quiz outside of class. But it could have covered the reading for today or the previous lecture notes. So I'll talk a little bit about that when we go over the syllabus in more detail. But you want to look at these readings. Use this reading and the notes. How do you get out of that? Go away. And the way it's highlighted as a kind of model for how to actively read. This is a one way of looking at reading texts in a way that isn't merely passive. So you're engaging it. And I might have mentioned this last time. One of the benefits of philosophy is that the content is something that you've probably thought about before. So there's ways of connecting the readings, even if it's written by somebody centuries ago and in a different language. The material, the subject matter is something you've probably thought about, and so that you can connect it somehow to your life. That's the best thing you can do with a new subject matter that's different, perhaps, than you're used to. Find a way of connecting it to something that you do understand or that is relevant to you. And you should be able to do this fairly simply, since you've all thought about issues of life and death, of meaning and purpose, of freedom, of existence of God, what's the right thing to do, moral situations, and so on. These are things that you've given some thought, but perhaps not in a formal, logical fashion, philosophical fashion that we'll be doing here. So that's part of the thing I'm doing here with these notes is sort of modeling how a good way of reading actively. Don't print out all of these because not all these readings are going to be required. A lot of these are merely suggested. And some of them are not even mentioned on the syllabus. There's just extra stuff if you're interested. So all of that is under the Files folder in your home page, primary readings. And then the review guidelines. I don't recall if I touched on this last time. It's important for you to look at the study questions before you get into the readings. And the best way to prepare for the exam, so I'll jump to the syllabus here, there are 3 exams, and they're part multiple choice, part essay. These questions here are the exact same questions you'll find on the test. It's just that you don't know which ones you're going to get. There's 11 total. I'll be picking out 5 of them, and you'll have to choose out of those 5. The best way to prepare for this is to have answers written out for each one. And the best way to do that is to do it slowly over time. Start working on, so this question you probably should have already started working on. If not by today, start over the weekend or whatever by next class, that you've already got a sample answer, which is roughly a page. Give or take a little bit. A full page to address each of these essays. That's 11 pages of notes just on studying the essays. But if you do that, and I suggest doing it in groups or at least one other person so you can share the labor, you will be much better prepared for the exam, and that test anxiety that everyone has will be alleviated at least somewhat, because you'll be much better prepared. Also, it makes the readings easier, because now you go into the reading with this in the back of your mind. What is the central thing I'm looking for? And you see questions like that with Plato. And if I might make additions to the study guide or amendments. If I do, obviously, I'll let you know well in advance. But the study guides are all posted, even up to exam 3, they're posted. So do make note of that. In preparation for the exam, study those essay questions. That'll help with the essay questions and also with the multiple choice questions. And that takes us to the syllabus, which I've given everyone except those who just walked in. Who needs a syllabus? Anyone else? Okay, 1 and then 2. You pass that to the other person who just walked in. Just reach back. All right. So last time I introduced myself, didn't I? Mm-hmm. Okay. It's a little bit late to do that. Anyway, my name is there. My office is there temporarily. I might have mentioned I'm moving to cross campus, going on to the I don't know what it's called. The interdisciplinary building. Is that what it's called?
IDC.
IDC. That's what it is. Still don't know all the acronyms yet. I'll be moving to that building. They didn't tell me when, but soon. And I'll let you know when that changes. But as far as meeting me, That's where I am until the change. Those are my office hours. Use them. If you're having trouble understanding the material, if you have questions about the class, if you're having difficulty outside of class, let me know about it so that I can help you. I can't help, I can't give you extra attention if I have no idea that there is an issue. And there are so many students, it's going to be difficult for me to reach out to you if I'm concerned. I will do that if I am concerned, but you should take on that burden first. If something's unclear, if something's problematic or what have you, email me or come by office hours. If these hours don't work, if they don't fit your schedule, just let me know. I'll try to figure out something outside of that. And this is my email. That's the best way to get in touch with me. I tend to respond fairly quickly. And this, I think I mentioned, is you can just, once you go online to get the syllabus, just click on that. It goes to my, I guess you'd call it my webpage. It's a decent site, I think I mentioned last time, or it used to be really great. Now they're trying to force people to upgrade and spend money on it. So it's less of a forum for just sharing documents. It's now becoming a money-making venture, which ruins it, as far as I'm concerned, in this particular context. However, you can still use your Google or Facebook account to access the stuff free, and there's still millions of papers freely available. You don't need to upgrade, and don't give them a penny. They're pissing me off. I'd be so angry if I forced somebody into using this. You're not forced to use it. If I suggested it, and then you ended up paying money on it, and I'd feel bad. But anyway, there's still access. You can see and do research there, and see some other stuff. Let's see. And there I quote Louis C.K. I mentioned Louis C.K. last time, and the moral quandaries related to that. We'll see him again at the end of the semester. As far as the textbook, you have it at the bookstore. Anyone have difficulty getting this? Ultimate Questions by Niels Rauhut, 3rd edition. Anyone have difficulty?
It's kind of hidden on the wrong side of the shelf.
I'm sorry?
It's kind of hidden on the wrong side of the shelf. They say
Oh.
philosophy's on the right side of the shelf.
Yeah, it's on the wrong side.
Huh.
But
What, did you mention it to him? And are they going to fix
it
it?
to him and said that's where we have to put it, so.
Does it say philosophy?
It doesn't say philosophy on that side. It's like the math
like
side or something like that.
Philosophy, and it's on that side of it.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's really...
philosophy's on the right side, and then the other side of it is it's
Oh.
not marked whatsoever. It's the only
They should-
philosophy book.
There's like one little corner.
Yeah.
And they put the photography books there too, on the wrong side.
Well, I apologize. You don't have to... Does anyone here work at the bookstore? Okay, you don't have to buy it there. You can get it online for like $5 and just ship it to you. It may cost like $10 to ship it to you, but then it's still $15 if my math is correct. And it is. Yes.
Like the lowest price is $47
$47 for used?
for used.
That's because the bookstore has to make a profit, I guess. I don't know why they do that.
No, not in the bookstore, online. Online is
Oh.
$47 plus $5 shipping.
That can't be true.
Yeah, that's what it said on Amazon.
Yeah.
No, don't use Amazon.
And the, like,
Does anyone here work for Amazon? I try half, what is it called? Half texts, half books. Damn it. There's a webpage that's available for textbooks. Half.com, maybe something like that. There should be, I've known of students who get it for very cheap. I thought Amazon had it cheaper than that too. But in any case, you should be able to get it readily available. And it's even in the, I think there should be a copy in the library if you don't want to get the text. To buy it, you can get it at the library and reserve it for 4-hour periods of time or something like that. But you really should buy it, and don't buy it thinking you could sell it back. You're not going to get anything for it. They never give you anything for these books sold back. You would want to keep this anyway, so that when you get older and you're on your deathbed, you can jump to the part about God and meaning and purpose. You just pull it out and read it. Console yourself. And feel good that you didn't sell it back for $4 many years ago. You'll get more than 4, but okay. So that's required, but also are required the primary readings, right? They're all PDF format. Please let me know if you can't access them. We already talked a little bit about the exams. There are 3 of them. They're 100 points each. They're part multiple choice, part essay. So have on exam day one of the big Scantron sheets that has the front and back. I guess it's 50 and 50. There'll be upwards of, how many questions? I haven't decided how many questions, but it'll be about 50% of your test. I used to do all essay exams because this is philosophy, and that's what it should be. It should be writing. It's hard to come up with decent multiple choice questions in philosophy. They're either too easy, too hard, or useless. And so I hope mine are none of those, but it's taken a while to get the right questions because I have to find some happy medium between grading 200 essays and going insane and being able to adequately assess your work. So I think some multiple choice, some essay helps to do that. So you'll want to have a Scantron, the big Scantron for exam days, and a number 2 pencil for that. Also for quizzes, you want to have, every day, have with you just a packet of your Scantrons. Those, you can use the small ones for the quizzes. I think they come in 15 question. You can get them at the bookstore for like a packet of them for like $1. I don't know how much they are. They're really cheap. But have a Scantron every day for a potential quiz, because there could be a quiz any day. There are 12 total, and we drop the lowest 2, right? And the quizzes are typically more or less objective. They give you a sense of what to expect for the multiple choice on the exams. So a quiz that's multiple choice, some quizzes will be multiple choice, some quizzes will be group work, in which you'll work together on a particular problem and writing out something. And it's a good benchmark to see where you are in class. The best way to prepare for quizzes is to review your notes from the previous class or classes, and make sure you've done the readings for that day. So for instance, if we had a quiz today, it could be on, in general, questions about Bertrand Russell's Philosophy for Laymen, or the discussion we had in class last time. So that tells you you should take notes. Definitely take notes. Even though there's going to be the PowerPoints available to you in PDF format, that's not enough. You want to have notes about the PowerPoints, because the PowerPoints aren't going to just have all of my things I'm saying. And ideally, you have somebody in class that you can exchange notes with if you miss class, and even if you don't miss class, you're both there. It's a good idea to exchange notes, to share your notes for preparation for exams. All right, read through that. Don't leave class in the middle of it. Contact me. When you're contacting me, don't use these things here. I don't like any of those. Just say professor or whatever. Get into the habit of it being a kind of professional way of communicating. I tend to get back to emails fairly quickly. Just make sure you note who you are and in the subject matter, perhaps what class it's coming from. And check your email frequently for messages from me. Attendance and drop. So I don't want anyone to drop, although it's inevitable. It happens for various reasons. Like I said earlier, if there's an issue with the material, it's not making sense, you're having difficulty with it, come to me. We also will have, I believe for this class, a tutor, and I'll let you know what the hours are and where that will be at the Gateway Center, I'm pretty sure. A student who's done very well in philosophy classes, and as an additional assistance for you. Additional resource. Use all the resources we have up here. We've got the study guide. You have the philosophical glossary. You'll have the PDFs. You'll have me to ask questions in class. Do that. If something's unclear, raise your hand and ask. If it's unclear to you, it's probably unclear to others as well, so it will benefit everyone. And I'm serious about this, wanting you to do well. I can't help you if I don't know if there's an issue. So do come to me. Even if it's not having related to class, and there may not be anything I can do about it, but I won't know that unless you come to me about that. I take it personally if you do poorly. So here's a selfish argument for why I don't want you to do bad, because I feel like crap if you do. Even if it's really not my fault, I still, take it on as a kind of burden. I'm not like some of those teachers. None of them are here, I suspect. This is a great place, I have to say. But previous schools I've worked at, there are some teachers who are proud of the fact, after the 10-day roster, that there's like a third of the class gone. They all dropped. They couldn't take it. And they're proud of themselves. But they shouldn't be. They're just dicks. That's not good. They're bad people. That's a bad person. That's a character flaw to be happy that somebody's dropped your class for whatever reason. I'm not happy. I don't feel good about it. So that's not because I'm a morally outstanding person. I do want you to do well for your sake, but it's really a lot selfishly for mine. So I'll do what I can, but there's only so much I can do. So you'll have to work with me. You have to work hard. You have to do the work, and you have to come to me if you need assistance. Okay, academic honesty, that applies primarily to essays and plagiarism, but it applies to classes, quizzes and tests. You're sitting way too close together. I mean, these desks are ridiculous for a classroom. I apologize for that. It's not, I didn't choose it, but don't cheat is what that's saying, basically. It's unethical to cheat. We'll get to ethics and moral reasoning toward the end of the semester, so I don't have time to make that argument for you, but it's unethical, so don't do it. And you don't benefit yourself by cheating. In fact, there's even a saying, cheaters never win. All right? I hate slogans, but that's a good one. That's all I have time for is to give you a slogan on that. Disability statement, please read that. If you need information from me or if you need assistance from me on that, let me know and I'll work with you. Just get me the documentation, not a problem. Here are those helpful links with respect to tutoring. And then there's this statement on collaboration, which I think is very important. It's long. I'm not going to read through it, but I want you to read through it. This was written up a number of years ago. I was teaching a class called Philosophy of Religion, and in the class I had a large segment of philosophy club students. The name of the club at the time was That Club Than Which None Greater Can Be Conceived. I mentioned that last time. And I thought, yes, that's right, from the sweatshirt. And I thought this would be awesome. A class with a lot of people already interested in philosophy. And it was great. Except I didn't, and this was on me, I didn't notice how they were behaving with respect to other students. I didn't notice that when other students might raise a question, the philosophy club students, as a kind of clique, as a kind of group, would kind of mock them, would laugh at them, and would respond somewhat combatively with respect to the positions that the other students were raising. And that led to an atmosphere in which only a few people were talking, namely the philosophy club students. And it took me too long to recognize that. And by the time I had recognized it, and a student had to come up to me and say, I don't feel comfortable presenting my beliefs, my ideas, my arguments, because I feel like they're just going to get shot down and mocked, I realized I had ruined, or I had allowed the atmosphere of the class to be ruined. And in response, I wrote up this long statement on collaboration, and it made me think about and we're going to get to this today, argument, what the basic tool that philosophers use, namely logic and argumentation, has a negative connotation to it. And there's a good reason it has that negative connotation for those outside of philosophy, because, at least this is how I was trained, you're trained to use argument as a weapon, as a battle. In fact, there's a metaphor that's sort of driving our interactions when we argue philosophically, sometimes, and it is argument as war. And you see this when you engage in defending a position. And what are the people who are listening to your paper or your argument? They're supposed to attack that position. And then you respond, rebut, retreat, or whatever. Notice the language is very militaristic. And that is not good for philosophy. And admittedly, this is how I was trained. You present a paper, you present an argument, you defend it. You hear somebody else's argument, you look for weaknesses, and you attack it. And there are a lot more other terms that you might use that are kind of militaristic. When you think of argument as a war, then there's all sorts of other negative emotions that go with it, namely winning and losing. The goal of argument in this class, the goal of philosophical argument for me in this class, and therefore for you, is not to win. It is not to defeat. It's not even necessarily debate, because when you hear the word debate, it implies a competition. I won the debate. I won the argument. That is not how we're going to look at argument here. Argument is not war. Argument is not a fight. It's not just a contradiction. It's a collaborative. That's this notion here of collaboration. It's a collaborative effort, a discussion, a dialogue. And my hope is that after this class, you will want to be able to present your position, your opinions, your beliefs to others so that they can find weaknesses in it. Because only in that way can you improve upon your position, your belief, whatever it might be. You're not going to improve upon your mode of thinking if you never subject it to criticism. But the criticism has to be done in, if you want, a safe way, where you don't feel like your opinions, yourself, is being attacked. And I think this is a predominant view not just in philosophy now, but especially in politics. you see a conservative and a liberal on extremes. If the liberal addresses a problem in the argument of the conservative, or vice versa, instead of interpreting that as, oh, you pointed out an error in my reasoning, it's, oh, you've besmirched my character as a human being. You're now evil to me. And that kills the capacity, the ability to reason together. Philosophical argument is a mode of reasoning together to improve our thinking, to improve our lot. I'll say a lot more on that as we continue throughout the semester. But just keep that in mind. If it feels like to you your opinion's not being heard, either because of other students or because of me, let me know, and I will try to work on that, because I don't want that to be stifled at all. Does that make sense to everyone? And then there's this. I wrote this while taxiing on an airplane, as you'll note when you read it. This is a logical operator here. It means it's a negation. It says, it is not the case that I am laughing out loud. It's a little logical joke there. It's a very little one. Cell phones, what do you think? Do you think I like having cell phones go off in class?
No.
Do I like seeing you text message people who aren't here while I'm talking with you, while I'm having a conversation with you? Does anyone like that? Would you do that with anyone? Would you engage in a conversation with anyone, like one-on-one, as we're talking? Let me give you a thought experiment. Remember what a thought experiment is? Just imagine this scenario. Class is over, and it's just me and you. We're talking, and we're saying, you have a question about class. I'm looking at you, and we're talking about it. And then all of a sudden, as we're talking, you just pull your phone out, and you start texting. As you're listening to me, looking up on occasion. Would you do that? Who would feel comfortable doing that? No one. Oh, you would?
If I'm comfortable with them. Yeah.
Yeah, like friends. I've done that before because they know me.
Mark that on the record. You do it because they would do it to you. Yeah. Get them back. That's right. You're going to text in front of me? Well, I'll text in front of you. And then you're no longer talking to each other. You're texting somebody else. Interesting. So it matters, right? If it's somebody that you're just friends with but if you're in a conversation, you're talking with a friend of yours about the existence of God and the meaning of life. This is the meaning of life. This is important. Yeah, hold on. Then you're texting somebody who's not there. That would be weird, wouldn't it? The point in this case is it's me. You're talking to me. And I'm talking with you. Philosophy is a dialogue. It's a conversation. I'm talking with each one of you. Although I can't make eye contact consistently with each one of you. I mean, that'd be weird if I spent the whole class just looking at one person. And the next class is going to be you. I don't have time for that. But think of it in that way. And here's your first argument to evaluate. It's an important one to evaluate because you may change my whole policy if you can convince me. You can do battle with me. No. If you can convince me that I'm wrong. I'm going to use an argument by analogy. Something we'll talk about in a little bit. It's called an inductive argument. It's a comparison. Is it acceptable to text in class? Well, consider this. What is the morally and logically relevant difference between you texting in a conversation with me? I'm talking with you after class, and then you just start texting. We were just a moment ago engaged in a conversation, and now you're texting. What is the morally and logically relevant difference between that scenario and you texting while I'm conversing with you now, but it's just that you're in a group? It's a difference, but what is the logically and morally relevant difference in those two scenarios? And here's how the argument works. If you cannot establish that there is a relevant difference between the two scenarios, and in the one scenario in which it would be absurd for you and uncouth or unjust or whatever to text while talking individually, then you ought to reason similarly and conclude that it's wrong to text while in a group. Do you see how the argument goes? Is it properly analogous, or am I mistaken? Is there a relevant dissimilarity that would justify texting in class, but not in an individual conversation? I'll take your silence as victory on my part. I win! 1-0 for keeping score. Okay? Just kidding. Don't write that down. It's not a victory. It just means you agree that's cool. So this, remember this, if I see you texting, I'm going to yell at you and say you're being irrational. Don't take offense to that, because I'm just meaning you're not abiding by your own argument, your own justification from the previous argument. From accepting that argument by analogy worked, and you text in class, you're not abiding by your own reasoning. Unless I'm mistaken, yes?
Well, it's kind of an unfair fight, or unfair argument.
Yeah, not fight.
Unfair argument is you have studied this for years and you have taught it for years, where we are coming in as a intro to philosophy, so to argue on your level would be unfair to us.
Yes. Fair enough, but I'm giving you the opportunity to potentially change the structure of my class. Do other teachers do that?
I agree with what you're saying.
Okay.
So,
No, all right.
On the level playing field, there is no level playing field there. You've studied and taught for years on something, on how to give a proper argument on something like this, and then asking us to try and argue.
Oh, I was, yeah. I didn't mean to do that as, let's spar now. I want to just, really, maybe I'm wrong about the analogy. A lot of the things we cover in class, there are going to be things, this is always the case, where some students have thought about it, have read about it, have written about it more than I have. Right? Sometimes that's the case. That's somewhat rare. I mean, obviously, this is my job. This is an introductory class. You may not have any interest in philosophy whatsoever. And you didn't have philosophy in high school, probably, which is a travesty, which is bullshit that they don't have it in high school as a requirement. That's not your fault. But that's fair. That's true in all cases. But your grade in this class doesn't depend on that kind of thing. In any case, it's a long story there. Don't text in class is the conclusion. And the ringtones, what do you think I think about ringtones? Yeah, put them on silent. I think they're well, how about this as a game? If your phone goes off and it's a ringtone I don't like, and it happens twice in one class, I get to take that phone and smash it in front of the class. I mean, everyone has to agree to this, obviously. You can't. Yes?
Which ringtone would you like?
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you that. It's not a game anymore. Although Jay Biebs is not bad. It's Justin Bieber. So your silence is legally binding. If nobody says anything, then you agree. Here's the rules. If the cell phone goes off twice in one session and it's a ringtone I don't like, I get to smash that phone in front of the class. You have a question?
I object to that.
What's your name? What? Will. Did you just make that up? Will objects and has ruined the game for us. Everyone has to agree. If anyone doesn't, this can't legally go. So Will has basically ruined the semester for everyone. So I can't do it. I'll just tell you not to have your cell phones on, because there's a trick. All ringtones suck. That was really what I was going to end up saying. Any other questions? If you need to have your cell phone on, put it on vibrate, let me know that you may need to take a call or something. That's fine. Just, take it outside or whatever. But try and remember to turn it off. It's hard. You're going to start feeling withdrawal symptoms to have your phone away from you. You'll feel it vibrating in your pocket, and then it's not even there. Those are called phantom rings, and it tells you you're way too connected to your phone when you have those, and you've all had them. Don't tell me you haven't. Wait, my phone's going off. Oh, I don't have my phone with me. And then you start vomiting or whatever happens. So, where's my phone? Okay. Philosophy Club. I don't know when they're meeting yet. Usually it's Fridays. That's what it was last semester. I'll let you know when I find out. Here's the grading schedule. Each test 100 points. They're not final exams, not cumulative. And then you got the quizzes that are 100 points total. Remember, we dropped the lowest 2 quizzes. If you miss a quiz, don't worry, don't despair. It's just 10 points. And we dropped that. That'll presumably be your lowest score. If you miss another one, again, don't worry. We dropped the lowest 2. If you miss a third quiz, don't despair. But worry a little bit. Why am I missing so much classes? Why am I missing all these quizzes? There are no makeups for quizzes, but we dropped the lowest 2, so that's kind of like extra credit, to the extent that there is extra credit. And there is not extra credit beyond that. I should be very clear on that. Yeah?
If we email you in advance, like we have to miss a day, would you let us know that we're going to miss a quiz?
They're pop quizzes. I don't necessarily know when there'll be quizzes. It's based upon the pace of the class.
All right.
Making up quizzes, it would be just too difficult. And it's also there as a means to keep you and get you to come to class, right? You do better in class. This is not a hard and fast rule, but it's just simply my experience. Those who miss class a lot don't do as well because a lot of the stuff is done in discussion. Yeah.
Do we get to hold on to our 2 lowest test grades if they help us our grade at all? Or are they just absolutely drop?
How would your 2 lowest grades help you?
Like, let's say that we don't do great on a test.
Uh-huh.
Like, we get like I hope I never get a 50, but if I get a 50, and
It's
my
unheard of.
2 lowest grades
Yeah.
on a quiz, for whatever reason, are 70 and I still got a 50.
I see. That almost never happens that way. Typically, you always benefit from dropping the lowest quiz grades. If you do the math and you find that, oh, wait a minute, dropping these actually hurts my grades, then definitely will not drop those for you. But that almost never happens. That's an interesting question. Let me know if that does. But I will do that in your favor, of course. Okay. Any other questions on the syllabi or the syllabus? And then we have the schedule, is what we did last time. Here's what we're doing today. We're going to get into the basics of arguments. Probably won't get to fallacies today. We'll do that next class. You had the Bertrand Russell reading, which we kind of already touched on. I'll refer to it again on occasion as we go throughout. It's basically a primer to what philosophy is. And Russell, again, a very clear writer, and he has a very dry sense of humor, I think, as well. Gets at the issue better than most, I think. So that's what I use as the primary reading for that. You also had the suggested reading, which was just philosophers from Rock Valley College, and the Sinnerbrink and Zavala reading on what philosophy is. Sort of a contemporary response to a politician who argues that philosophy is useless. My previous school wrote about this in response, saying, here's a good opportunity to publicize what benefits there are to philosophy. And, one of the benefits happens to be formal training in logic. And logic is the science of argumentation. Is logic useful today, you think? It's a silly question, isn't it? Is critical thinking useful today? Remember, I think I mentioned this last time. I wished I was on stage with Marco Rubio when he said philosophy was useless. Remember what we said? You should say, if somebody tells you philosophy is useless, like you tell your parents that you're taking a philosophy class, and your parents say, what the hell are you wasting your time with that for? If they'll say that. Nobody got that, right? Mm-hmm. From your parents? Anyone get that kind of response? It's okay if you did. I'd like to hear it. If you do get that response, all you have to respond with is what? Somebody tells you philosophy is useless.
Why do you do it?
Why is it useless? And what happens then?
And then if they attempt to explain it, they're using philosophy.
And didn't you have that up on like a Twitter thing?
Twitter. I don't have a Twitter.
And
Oh, that was a different one. That's
same.
that was between science and philosophy. So a scientist is asking, what's the
Still 2 occupations. Arguing against it.
Right. It's still to the point here. What's the use of philosophy? And the person says, I don't know. What's the benefit of science? Well, science is, and then before they even finish, the moment you start answering that question, here's the benefit of science. You're now doing philosophy. The mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal, a very unfortunate first name, once remarked that to ridicule philosophy is to be a philosopher. Because, as we said last time, you're presupposing the very thing in question. If I argue, if I present a case, here's premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, therefore conclusion, philosophy is useless, I just use the very thing I claimed was useless. Speaking of useless, that thing is useless. I will try and use it maybe when I figure out the board here. All right, so let's get into the basics of logic. You had the basics of argument, logic and argumentation. We do teach a logic class here. Mark Bobrow teaches logic. That's what's known as deduction, primarily, or formal logic. It's the kind of thing that's used with respect to the building of computers, that's used in artificial intelligence. It's used in all sorts of things. So there again is a usefulness of logic and philosophy. Then we have critical thinking, or inductive logic, or informal logic. It's the kind of reasoning that you use most often in your daily lives. Since we have 2 full classes devoted to those subjects, I only cover this very briefly in the intro section. We just need to get a sense, first of all, what an argument is, and then very briefly the two types of arguments or reasoning. Sometimes it's broken into three. You've got deduction, induction, and then there's a third that's sometimes utilized called abduction, which is called a fancy term for inference to the best explanation, which we'll talk about later, but that's really fits under the rubric or heading of induction. Two different, you've heard of deduction and induction probably, right? Where have you heard the word deduction?
Deduction points, something like.
What's that?
Deduction points.
Oh, to deduct point. No, that's different.
Oh.
To deduct is to take away. But when you deduce, it does sound like you're removing. But you're not. When you deduce, and you'll learn a partial definition of deduction, I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, you'll learn a partial definition of deduction in mathematics classes, where the definition is almost always and only reasoning from a general claim to a more specific claim. And that's true, that is often the form of reasoning called deduction. But that's not all there is. That doesn't give us the necessary and sufficient conditions. Two terms we'll come back to today, or next class, for what deduction is. It isn't just reasoning from general claims to specific claims. And induction isn't just reasoning from specific claims to general claims. We'll see that there are some variations among them. But to just jump ahead, deduction deals with deriving certain conclusions, necessary conclusions, from presumed true premises. Whereas induction provides us with probabilistic conclusions derived from true premises. That's confusing on the face of it. I will explain that more as we go. Now the first thing, I've already touched on this with the syllabus. When you hear the word argument, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Just raise your hand.
I think of arguing with another person, like the combative
Yeah.
stuff we were talking about earlier.
That's the first thing that comes to your mind. I think that's unfortunate, but that's not your fault. That happens. Collaboration. That's the first thing that comes to your mind. That's awesome. That's good. That's what it should. That's what you want to happen. When you hear the word argument in philosophy. I had an argument with my wife last night. That immediately brings to mind you were having a battle. But little do you know, we were debating over whether we had free will or not. Her premise was using Hume, and I was using Schopenhauer. Anyway, and then we threw dishes at each other in anger. So that argument got heated. That never happened. Where was another hand? Yes? To prove a point, an argument can prove a point, and it can prove a point, it can be utilized to prove a point just for yourself. What do I think about free will? What do I think about God? I don't need another human being in the room with me to come up with an argument. I can write out the premises. Do you know what a premise is? What's a premise? A condition?
Or like something that you know for certain, like it's like people are like this in this country, and then it's like this, this, so it's like two things. Leading to like a conclusion.
Leading to a conclusion is,
Yeah.
that's correct. And it could be, as you're saying it, in more general terms, a premise is just a claim, a statement, that supports another claim. And the claim that's being supported, that's being held up, is called the what? No, the argument is the whole thing. The conclusion. An argument, in the most simple sense, is a series of statements, one of which lends support for the conclusion. And you only need one premise to make an argument. You have to have at least one. You have to have at least two claims. One, the premise that's holding up or leading support for the opinion. So in argument, in the most general sense, an argument is turning your opinion, whatever that is, into a conclusion. Turning an opinion, just what you believe, into a conclusion. Why is that? Because now, when you've turned it into a conclusion, that means you've given reasons for the opinion. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. Fine. But you're not entitled to your own conclusions. You have to work at it. You have to give reasons for it. I have there's no requirement for me to accept your opinion until you've given me some objective reasons, publicly available reasons, reasons that make sense, that count as facts, that count as evidence, that count as support to justify your opinion. Arguments that don't have those, that don't have reasons, are just spewing back and forth of opinions. And you find that enough on blogs and the Q&A sessions and the comment sections under all sorts of online sites. It's very unpleasant. But for our purposes, an argument isn't any of those things. There can be contradiction involved. There can be debate. That's fine. But it's more than that. It's more than just the conflict. In the simplest terms, it is holding up one claim with other claims. Again, I'll post these PowerPoints for you, so you don't need to worry about scribbling down all of the stuff that's on the slides themselves. However, if I talk too fast, just write faster. And if still is too fast, have me back up if something is unclear. Do you have a question?
No, just keeping this elevated.
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
You had a question the whole day. Okay. So there are premises and conclusions, and as I said, there's at least one premise, and you have indicator words sometimes to help you point out. Sometimes, not always do we use indicator words. We've italicized it here. The word because is an indicator word. It tells us that likely what follows is going to be the premise. Why did this happen? Because. This is true because. Now it's complex because that word could imply not just an argument, but something else called an explanation. This is an argument. Don't evaluate it yet. Just look at it and see there's a claim, she stole my cheese, being supported by another claim. Her breath smells like feet. That's not a very good argument. You would have to add, I think, another premise to link those two claims together. To make that a better argument, to the extent that you could, what would you add? Yes?
Cheese smells like feet.
What?
Cheese smells like
Cheese smells like feet. Premise one, cheese smells like feet. Premise two, her breath smells like feet. Conclusion, she stole my cheese. Does that conclusion have to be true if we accept the premises?
Yep.
Or is it possible that it's false even though the premises are true? It's false because it's inductive, and it's inductive because the conclusion could be false even though the premise is true. But why could the conclusion be false even though the premises are true?
There could be other reasons for her breast smelling.
Exactly. Her breath may smell like cheese naturally, or feet. Right, excuse me. Her breath may naturally smell like feet, it had nothing to do with cheese. Do you see? So it doesn't necessitate the conclusion. If it were a deductive argument, you could say it this way. Only, let's see, how would you phrase it? All people whose breath smells like feet have eaten cheese. Even this doesn't work because it doesn't imply she stole the cheese. She could have gotten somebody else's cheese. So that's actually a hard one to turn into a deductive argument. And that tells you something. It's not a very good argument. All right, and there's different ways that you don't need to write any of these down. These are all indicator words saying the same thing, just with different indications. Like, therefore is a very common conclusion indicator. In conclusion, ergo, some people don't ever say Latin. Don't use Latin phrases unless it's absolutely necessary. I know she stole my cheese because, that's the premise. Since her breath smells like feet, that's a premise. Since this happened, therefore this happened. Or that implies that she stole the cheese, and so on. Each of those is indicating that probably you have a premise or a conclusion. And oftentimes it's made clear by the way people speak, but sometimes it's not. So sometimes you might have to fill that in. All right. Another thing you want to keep in mind with arguments, in contrast to non-arguments, or just statements of belief, which is not an argument, nothing's being connected to support one thing over another, is something that looks very similar. Explanations look visually, and they sound similar to arguments, but they're doing something different. Remember, and there's different ways of defining argument. We've kind of said it different ways here. An argument is a series of statements designed to support or establish the truth of an idea or a claim. Technically, a claim is a sentence that has truth value. It's either true or it's false. The point of an argument is to establish that. But an explanation, while very similar, is really just shedding light on something that's already accepted. It's not a matter of debate. It's just showing, here's where the belief, for example, came from. So, if I were to say the North won the Civil War because they had more people and more material or something like that. Is that an argument? It's an explanation. It's a matter of historical fact. For most people. I went to school in Alabama, and it was not a fact for all the people who lived there. Still, in the 1990s. In fact, for some, not all, but for some in Alabama in the 1990s, it wasn't called the Civil War. It was called the War of Northern Aggression. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, they might dispute the fact that the North won, and you can see how an explanation could lead to an argument. But as it's written, or as I said it a moment ago, that was merely shedding light, not defending a claim. I might say God exists because it says so in the Bible, or because my parents told me. Is that an argument or explanation?
Argument?
Ooh,
Argument, because
I have both. What's that?
It's an argument because not everyone believes the claim.
That's not. I see where you're going. Not quite enough to make it an argument. Let's go. Yeah.
It's an explanation because it's a fact to them.
Because it's what?
Because it's like a fact to them, they believe it's true.
Right. It's not, is it defending the claim that the belief is true, or is it shedding light on where the belief came from? It seems like it's doing that, because you can turn it around and say, God doesn't exist. Why? Well, because Bertrand Russell said so. Bertrand Russell's an atheist. And therefore God doesn't exist. Or therefore I don't believe in God. Let me rephrase it. I don't believe in God because I read about it in Bertrand Russell. If it were an argument, and it could technically be interpreted as an argument, it would be a terrible argument. So instead of allowing that to be a terrible argument and interpreting it as a terrible argument, you ought to be charitable to the person who said it and assume they didn't intend for that first claim to defend or support the second claim, that God exists, but rather they're simply explaining something, and therefore they need not be critiqued for having a poor argument.
Wouldn't the burden of proof lie on the person who is trying to claim that God exists, though?
We'll get to that. Very good. So there's a fallacy or an error in reasoning which is called misplacing the burden of proof. And there are criteria that we look at and say, well, who has the burden? And if I misplace it, that means I'm pushing it on you erroneously, fallaciously, whereas I'm the one that's supposed to be doing the work. I'll come to that, remind me to come to that probably next class. We won't have time to get into fallacies today. But that's one that we'll see next time as the fallacy of misplacing the burden of proof. Okay, so the main differences pictured there between those two, explanation and argument. Now, as far as arguments go, who said, where did we hear the word deduction again? Somebody already said this. Sherlock Holmes, right? When does he say it? What is he talking about?
Deduces what's going on, how the crime was committed by looking at the facts.
How does he do that? What's an example? Who's a big fan of Sherlock Holmes? Give us a story in which he engages in deduction. Yeah?
I actually read quite a few Sherlock Holmes stories. I know one I think I recall probably is one about the speckled band, how they deduce what they're trying to figure out what it is that's killing the people, and they eventually discover that the speckled band is actually referencing a snake.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do they come to that conclusion?
Well, they have to try a bunch of various stuff to see what eventually it comes like, because what I would think from what I remember is they observe past victims of people who were killed by the so-called speckled band.
Okay. And they use past experiences and then make predictions about future experiences and compare those together. And then they make a deduction from that. Interesting. Let me give you a parallel. Yesterday the sun came out. It's in the sky. The sun came out the day before that and the day before that. Tomorrow, somewhat similar to today, no reason to think it's very different, I deduce that the sun will rise tomorrow. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
It's not. I tricked you. I apologize. I just tricked you there. Sorry. How about this? Sherlock Holmes is at a crime scene. There's the victim, there's blood, and there's a footprint in the mud, in the blood. And the footprint Sherlock Holmes recognizes is of a rare Italian loafer, because he knows this shit. I don't know how he does, but he always knows what people wear and how it's relevant, which is important. He recognizes that footprint, and it's a small footprint, let's say, of a very rare shoe. And then the next day he sees someone wearing that same type of loafer, Did I say loafer?
Yes.
Doesn't matter. And it's got mud on it, and also blood. For some reason, this idiot's wearing those shoes still. And Holmes says, what size shoe is that? Is that a size 8 or whatever? I'm riffing on what I suspect. This is not a great story, but you get it. And he says, that's interesting. And he goes from that to conclude, and let's say there's other data. Let's say that there's DNA evidence that Holmes finds, because he has a DNA kit before they had that. He's that good. And he takes a sample. It looks like your DNA was found at the crime scene. What's DNA? Doesn't matter. It was found at the crime scene. And we have a video. Again, Holmes has all sorts of cool stuff. There's a video of you stabbing the victim. Would you deduce that that suspect is guilty of the crime?
Well, that's not all inductive, right? Isn't it all probable? Well, I guess
That's-
the video, that's pretty.
The video is does the video make it necessarily true?
No.
If you have you been on the internet where you see a video of somebody doing something and then it turned out later, oh, that was just really good photoshopping, really good manipulation. Can you change videos nowadays pretty well? That's going to be the new wave of huge problems going forward, of people coming up with videos and using that to take people down by putting a face, your face maybe, onto a body of somebody doing something terrible. There's ways of finding this out with technology, but not unless the technology is good enough to test it. And so there's ways in which we can imagine all of this evidence is there, and let's imagine everything we say in our premises is true. It's still logically possible that the conclusion is false, that the accused is not guilty. They could have been framed. The blood could have been, what am I saying? Taken out of him and put there, like that case. Planted, that's the word. Like that case in Wisconsin, the making of a murderer, right? The prosecution, the police already had a vial of his blood from a previous case. And they looked at that vial after the fact, and there was a tiny hole in it, implying that somebody could have put a needle in there, taken the blood out, and put it at another crime scene. That's logically possible. It's possible the video would have been tampered with. It's possible that somebody heard you say you wanted to kill this person, but still, people talk that way all the time. I could just kill that guy. I could just kill a man. It's Cypress Hill. So, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that, for the future, it's going to make beyond a reasonable doubt a lot harder. Because now, since you can doctor everything.
Correct. Now, notice in law and in detective work, the bar is not so high as requiring a deductive proof. Judges don't require that you come up with a mathematical certainty that this person is guilty. Instead, we call it beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't say, is this person guilty? With absolute necessity. Nobody would be found guilty. Sherlock Holmes almost never used deduction. He almost always used inductive reasoning, which is not this. Go ahead.
So, I'm just slightly confused. If deduction is like, let's say Sherlock Holmes is at a crime scene that's technically suicide, and he goes, but there's like DNA in her fingernails, and he just sees facts. Is that a deduction that he says she was murdered, or is it?
Nope, that would be inductive too. Because the premises are such that the evidence, the facts, are used as support. Those are the premises, and they lead to the conclusion. Our conclusion is that it was, what'd you say, murder? She was murdered. What evidence, what premises do you use to drive the conclusion that she was murdered? Well, there's DNA of somebody else that we don't know, and it's under her fingernails, which is a common phenomenon of people who's trying to defend themselves. There may be defense marks of, trying to stop the crime, whatever. That's evidence for the view that it was murder. Strong evidence, perhaps, but not 100% necessitating evidence. It could be true that data was found there, that DNA was found, that those are commonly found in those kinds of murders. But she could have gotten that elsewhere. It's possible it could have come from some other place where she was playing flag football. Grabbed the flag and missed the flag and scratched the flesh.
That's just like 100% facts leading up to another.
A deductive argument is one in which, if we were to assume the premises were true, would they lead to the necessity of the conclusion? would the conclusion have to be true? Would it be a contradiction to deny the truth of the conclusion if you've accepted the truth of the premises? And I'll give some examples to make this clear. Did I see a hint? No?
You answered it.
Yes.
So since this is only based on the fact that we're assuming that mathematics is true and definitions are true, so in a blank universe, deduction would be impossible.
We do make assumptions with deduction, and deduction has its limitations because it's what's known as truth preserving. A deductive argument is one that has a particular form that you can just plug in anything. And if what you plug in is true, what is in the premises, that truth in the premises will be preserved in the conclusion. It's like a freezer. Freezer's great for preserving. If you have fresh meat, put it in the freezer, and it's a good freezer, you get fresh meat at the end. If you have rancid meat, you're not going to make it better by putting it in the freezer. If you have false premises, you don't make it what's known as a sound argument by putting it in the freezer. So, for instance, the concepts that are used in deduction are valid and sound. Those are the two main criteria. Is it a good argument? Well, it depends. If it's a deductive argument, is it valid? And I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but a valid argument by definition doesn't mean good. That's the non-logical sense of valid. That's a valid point, meaning it's a good point. In logic, a valid argument, validity, is one in which you ask, if the premises were true, you engage in a thought experiment. Let's imagine a world in which the premises were in fact true. Would they necessitate the conclusion? Would the conclusion have to be true on pains of irrationality? It would be irrational, contradictory, to deny the truth of the conclusion if you accept the premises. If that's so, it's a valid argument. Sound simply means it's valid, and in fact, and in reality, the premises are all true. It's confusing. Induction is different. Induction deals with probabilities. Each of these kinds of arguments, and the textbook discusses syllogism. You don't need to know so much about the specific kinds. Syllogism is a specific kind of argument going all the way back to Aristotle, in which you have two premises and a conclusion. You have a major and minor premise, and a minor and major term, and they're all connected in a particular way. The point we want to focus on is that deductive arguments are such that if the premises were true, they would necessitate the conclusion. With inductive arguments, you can have one that is strong. If the premises are true, would they lead to the great likelihood, not necessity, because you're never getting necessity, you're never getting certainty. But if the premises were true, would they lead to the strong likelihood of the conclusion being true? If so, it's called a strong argument. The next question is, are the premises actually in reality true? If so, and if it's a strong argument, then it's also cogent. Soundness is to cogency as validity is to strength with respect to deduction and induction. You don't call an inductive argument valid. Validity doesn't come in degrees. It's either valid or invalid. Induction does come in degrees. There are probabilities. You're closer or further away from the likelihood of. So the more evidence we find in a crime scene, the greater likelihood that this person's guilty or something. There's degrees to it. And that's typically what you'll find in most arguments that you engage in. So let me give you an example, and then
So deduction is more solid and induction is more like kind of pensive in a way?
it's more solid in that it's like mathematics. I can figure out. Yes. I can figure out the area of this room if I know what the length of the two sides are. And if I do the math properly, I will necessarily come up with the right conclusion.
So it's like an equation versus induction is kind of creating
Yes,
probabilities.
creating. Very good. Deduction is truth preserving. Think of it mostly of a form. Whereas induction is truth producing. We, in our conclusion, in an inductive argument, this is the most important part of the distinction, I think, and this is what distinguishes induction from deduction in a way that most math classes, for instance, leave out, it seems. Induction is truth producing. We learn something about the world beyond what we had in our premises. I'll explain that with some examples. Notice this form. This is a form. Anything you plug into that structure, that mechanism, is going to be valid. If P then Q, P therefore Q. This goes by the Latin phrase of modus ponens, which just means the way of positing. You don't need to know all of that. All you need to know is that this is a deductive form, and it's valid, which means any content you plug into those variables, anything you plug into the P and the Q, will provide you with a truth-preserving structure of reasoning. No matter what it is. Even something absurd, like, if something exists, then that thing has a foot fetish. Hey, Santa exists. Therefore, Santa has a foot fetish. It's uncomfortable to say that, perhaps. Santa has a foot fetish. That's a valid argument. That doesn't sound right. But it is. It's a valid argument. Is it a sound argument? Why not?
Yes, it is.
It is a sound argument. Why is it sound?
Because valid and sound go together.
They do go together, sometimes. What does sound mean? What's the definition of soundness?
Premises are true.
It's a valid argument and all the premises are true. So if you say that's sound, you're admitting that anything that exists has a foot fetish. You all exist. So, there you are. But is it really a fetish if everyone does it? Let's move on. So, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you plug in. And that previous one was called a hypothetical syllogism. This one's called a categorical syllogism.
Sorry, what was that definition for a sound argument?
Sorry, sound argument is one that is valid and in reality has all true premises. So here's one that's valid. All men are mortal, I am a man, therefore I am mortal. What makes it valid? Because it would be logically impossible. It would be absurd. It would be contradictory. Contradiction means to literally speak against. Contradiction. And it is a terrible thing in logic. Logicians hate contradictions. Logicians think that contradiction, or what's known as the law of non-contradiction, going all the way back to Aristotle again, as so many things do in philosophy, go back to Aristotle. Contradiction is an essential presumption of reasoning, the law of contradiction. Now there's a history to it in which some argue that, well, maybe there are exceptions to the law of contradiction. Maybe some contradictions do hold. Go ahead.
Now, if I were to add one more to that as a conclusion, could I then conclude from that women are not mortal?
No, because then you'd be equivocating on man. And to equivocate means to use the same term in more than one sense and not explain that you've changed senses. So there is a joke about that where it says, all men are rational. No woman is a man, therefore no woman is rational. That's a terrible argument. Although it sounds great. I mean, it sounds logical. It isn't. It isn't. Because to equivocate means to use the word man in two different senses. All men are rational. What you mean to say is all humans are rational. Notice once you clarify it, all humans are rational. No woman is a man, therefore no woman is rational. That doesn't make any sense. That conclusion no longer follows once you've cleaned it up. All men are mortal, I am a man, therefore I am mortal. Imagine I said, all men are mortal, I am a man, but I'm not mortal. That would be similar to saying, I am mortal and also I'm not mortal. An obvious contradiction, an absurdity. So, this is valid because it's impossible to deny the truth of the conclusion while you accept the truth of the premises. That's all we mean by validity. Is it sound? How do we determine that? Will everyone agree? Does everyone think all humans are mortal? What does it even mean? Now we get into that question that pisses off non-philosophers. Well, it depends on what you mean by mortal and what you mean by man, and so on.
Can there be such thing as like a stupid deduction? Let's say someone doesn't believe this or something. Can it still be a deduction if it's not sound in their mind?
Oh, correct. It could be a valid argument that's unsound, or it could be an invalid deductive argument. Correct. And if it's invalid, it's by definition also unsound. But again, that's going beyond what we're going to cover in this class. But certainly, you can have a deductive argument that follows. There are certain kinds of formal fallacies, like affirming the antecedent or denying the consequent, which we don't have to worry about here. But those are examples of deductive argument forms that are, however, invalid. Because they're invalid because it's logically possible for a false conclusion to come out of those two premises. And that's, by definition, an invalid argument. All right, and again, you can plug in anything. All flubs are lipples. What's a flub? What's a lipple? I don't know. But she's a flub. And if she's a flub, she's a lipple. Valid. Valid. Is it sound? I don't know. Either, I don't, logicians seem to debate this, whether or not it's indeterminate, and therefore soundness can't be determined, or we just say it's unsound because we don't know the truth value of those claims. So, deduction, truth preserving, deals in certainties. Induction, truth producing, and therefore deals in probabilities. Like when you make a prediction, you can't know the future for sure, but probably the sun will come out tomorrow. I'm not going to bet my bottom dollar. It's waiting for somebody to jump into song. Not prediction in the Nostradamus sense, by the way. Prediction in the scientific sense, right? Where you base it upon previous experiences and so on.
But actually would be pretty safe to bet, because you wouldn't have to pay it back.
Oh, that's true. I hadn't thought of that. Bet you $1 million the sun... Wait, how would it go? Yeah, bet you $1 million the sun will come out tomorrow. And if it doesn't come out tomorrow, you won't have to pay the person because you'd be dead. Good point. I hadn't thought of that. It's a real positive way of looking at that example. So premises intend to prove or demonstrate the probability. So this comes in degrees. And it's a matter of degree. It's not a matter of either or. Strength comes in degrees. When you make a prediction, you're basing it upon previous experiences. Sorry, question?
Co-induction is a conclusion that isn't guaranteed true.
Correct. Even if all the premises in an inductive argument are true, it's still logically possible for the conclusion to be false. That doesn't mean the argument's no good.
Because it's an assumption.
Not assumption, but because it doesn't necessitate. So if I were to say, let's say somebody comes in soaking wet into the room, what's the immediate thing you infer? What?
It's raining.
What did you say?
What?
Why are they wet? Right, and that's the question you ask. And what do you immediately infer? Oh, it's raining. Although, would you infer that here in Santa Barbara? It rained like twice, and that caused mudslides. That's how rare it rains here. Sorry, I don't mean to. It's too soon. But it matters, of course, what experience you've had. If you know that there's a campus-wide water balloon fight, you're not going to immediately jump to the conclusion that it's raining or that they went swimming. You're going to jump to the conclusion, oh, they got hit by a bunch of water balloons. Does the fact that they came in soaking wet, and there's other things too. It may be that they're not soaking wet. It could be a new fashion style of clothes that look wet but aren't. Does that sound absurd? Is it any more absurd than clothes that look ripped up and destroyed but are new? I've had an argument with my wife about, and I still don't get it.
So since the truth of the conclusion doesn't rely on premises, that makes it an induction.
Oh, no. It does rely on the premises. It's just that the logical connection is only one of strength and not of necessity. I can say that the suspect is innocent, even though all the evidence against him is very strong. Because I can still say it's logically possible that my client was framed. Right? The conclusion isn't necessitated. It's possible the sun doesn't come out tomorrow. It's possible the sun will explode tomorrow. Is it likely? No. No astronomer I know thinks the sun is going to turn into a red giant or red dwarf.
Something else.
Something other than what it is tomorrow. But is it possible? Yes. Very small chance. And, yeah. Okay. So when you make an argument by analogy, like I did with the cell phone thing, I'm making a comparison between two things. And anytime you make a comparison, a likeness between two things, I'm not making an identity claim, I'm making a comparison. So it's possible that the conclusion is still false, even though all the premises are true. The same is the case with generalizations. When I generalize, I go from a small subset of information. I go from the species, so to speak, to the generic, to the general. I know something about that group, and that's part of the larger whole, so I generalize across the category. since I can't know something about everyone in the category, I have to make an inference. Generalization is not a bad thing, although it sometimes sounds like you're just generalizing. If you generalize in an inductive fashion by making an enumerative induction, for instance, by saying all of the swans that scientists have taxonomized have been white, therefore probably all swans are white, that's a decent inductive generalization. But it turns out there are counterexamples. Very few, but there are some black swans. Yes?
I'm not positive right here, but aren't kind of like racism and stereotypes in induction?
No, that's a great question. There's a difference, but it's tough to explain. Week 15. No. Yes. Week 14 and 15, we'll talk explicitly about the difference between an inductive generalization and a stereotype with respect to racial bias. There is a difference, and it's tough to distinguish them. A stereotype is a hasty generalization, but there's more to it than just an error in reasoning. We'll explain that maybe a little bit next class too, actually. I might come back to that. And then these are other, we're almost done here, so are we done at 2:05? Yeah. Okay. Do you guys want to stay a little longer?
I have a class.
Drop it. Drop that shit. All right, sorry. Sorry. From a position of authority, I'm telling you, authority means a position of expertise. That's all that means. You go to the doctor, a neurologist says, here are the charts, here's the x-ray, whatever. It shows you have a tumor, so probably you have a tumor. Probably. The experts could be mistaken. Right? Expert, that's why you get a second opinion. So argument from authority isn't ever going to be necessitating conclusion. Don't worry about science. Causal inference, this is what scientists use all the time. We use it with respect to medicine. What's the causal connection of this disease? Does tobacco smoke cause cancer? What is the connection? Is it possible that there is some other factor we don't know that's causing the cancer? Yes. Therefore, it's merely probable. But it's really, really likely that cancer is caused by tobacco, or tobacco causes cancer. However, the tobacco industry fought this by saying, look, there's doubt. Of course there's doubt, because it's an inductive argument. If you're going to besmirch this kind of inductive reasoning, then you've got to get rid of all inductive inferences, which is absurd. Which is kind of argument called reductio ad absurdum, which we'll have to talk about next time. So, for next class, let me make sure we know where we are. Make sure you get the reading. Make sure you do the readings. Where is it? Anticipate a quiz. So have your Scantron sheets and your number 2 pencils. Make sure you've read Rauhut 1 through 40 for Monday. And I will see you then. The Phyllis Rooney is a suggested reading, not required. If you came in late, please see me.